Hey guys, I recently released a video on why finishing all your shots is one of the most important technical elements that you need in order to have success at the game of tennis. But in today's video, I want to tackle the forehand because it is one of the most complex shots in tennis and it has many finishes. In fact, there are 5 different finishes on the forehand. I want to explain in great detail what those are and which one you should choose at the recreational level. And before we get started with the forehand finishes, one important thing to understand is that when we observe high-level players or elite-level players, you will see that players of this caliber will utilize different forehand finishes. So let's just take, for example, Novak Djokovic and Roger Federer. They will have their regular finish. So in Federer's case, it is somewhere between the elbow and the shoulder. In Djokovic's case, his regular finish is somewhere above the shoulder. However, both of these guys will utilize different finishes. So they will sometimes go around the head, kind of like Rafa does, and they will also sometimes go around the waist. So the important thing that I want you to take out of today's lesson is that while all high-level players have their bread and butter finish, their regular finish, certain circumstances and situations inside of the point will bring out different finishes. For example, if a player tries to put more spin on the ball, or if a player is in a defensive situation where they make contact behind the body, naturally they will finish around their head to get a hold of the ball. Depending on the height of the ball and their positions in the court, the finish might change. They might finish lower than they usually would. However, every player will have their bread and butter finish, their regular finish that was ingrained in their muscle memory. All right, so let's get to the 5 finishes on the forehand. I'm going to explain each one in great detail. Let's start from the top to the bottom. So let's start off with the Rafa finish. Basically, Rafa will go around his head like this. So he still has a circular swing path. The racket will still go around the body, and then somewhere around his right ear, because he's left-handed, the racket will start going around the head like that. Now, Rafa is one of the players with the most amount of topspin, and naturally, when he swings his racket like this, his swing path is a little bit more vertical than other players. Now, let me try out the Rafa finish. Now, I made a separate video about Rafa a long time ago, and I hit a bunch of these Rafa forehands. So what I found that I was actually having a hard time generating more power. I felt like that it does require a little bit of strength, believe it or not, to be able to powerfully bring the racket up in this way. So this is definitely not a finish that worked for me. And I will say that it is a finish that's quite unorthodox. I have not seen many players being able to pull this type of finish off consistently. But again, it's not a wrong finish at all. It's not a defensive finish either. A lot of people have this false belief that Rafa has a defensive forehand. Not at all. Rafa has one of the most aggressive forehands in the history of the game. Now, where people are getting confused, they are confusing it with the regular reverse forehand that's hit in this trot in defensive situations where players are hitting the ball behind the body and going like this. Yes, that's a defensive forehand, but it's not what Rafa's doing. So don't confuse Rafa's forehand with a defensive forehand. However, I will say that Rafa can pull it off, and maybe a few other players. There was a player back in the day called Igor Andreev, was a fantastic player who had a very similar forehand to Rafa, but I have not seen many other high-level players be able to pull this type of forehand off, and it is a quite extreme finish. Now on to the next finish, which is the around the neck finish that's used by Daniil Medvedev. I would also categorize this as an extreme finish because it is quite uncomfortable to bring the racket around the neck like this. It's almost like as if you were strangling yourself, and this does not feel that comfortable. It is not, again, just like the Rafa finish, it's not a wrong finish at all, but I have not seen that many players be able to attempt this type of finish. The reason why it's not wrong, because again, anytime you're going upwards, you're doing good things on your forehand. You're creating that vertical swing path, and good things are going to happen from intending to go up high. Now, does Medvedev always finish there? No, he doesn't. He has many different finishes, just like other players do. All right, so let me try the Medvedev finish, and let's see what that feels like. There it is around the neck. Again, not a big fan of it. It doesn't result in a bad forehand by any means, but just it feels awkward and it feels like suffocating to wrap the arm around the neck in this way. Now, of course, Medvedev is not holding the racket here and then strangling himself. He comes in and out of that position quite fast. He does something like this. He goes here and then the racket comes out quite fast. So it probably feels quite comfortable to him. But what I've found at the recreational level, where players are trying to copy this style, often they will prolong this period of time here, which is actually a good technique to be able to feel where you're finishing, to pause and freeze the finish. And this just doesn't feel comfortable for the vast majority of players. Now on to the next finish, which is the Djokovic finish, where the racket goes above the shoulder in this way. In my opinion, this is the most comfortable finish to execute at any level. Whether you're talking about the WTA, whether you're talking about the ATP, or whether you're talking about the recreational level. This is a very comfortable finish. There's a big space between the hand and the body, so it feels quite comfortable. And also by intending to go here, you are guaranteed to have a vertical swing path. And this is the type of finish that I employ on my forehand. Now, sometimes on my forehand, one of the weaknesses that I have is that sometimes I don't finish that much. Sometimes my racket kind of gets lost in this area and I don't get to finish my forehand all the time. But when I play my absolute best tennis, I tend to finish a lot more, and I have to remind myself to trust my forehand enough so that I can finish all the way. So in my opinion, this is a finish that translates really well, not only at the pro level, but also at the recreational level. To all you guys that are starting out at the beginner level or at the intermediate level, this is a really good finish to attempt to do. Basically, you're going to intend to go right over your shoulder. And what I always say is that the back of your right hand should go to your left cheek. If you are right-handed, that little flip in the end will give you more of a chance to have a more vertical swing path and employ more topspin. And not only does this feel comfortable, but in my opinion, this looks very stylish. It's a very good looking finish, and it is my recommendation for the rec level. Now the next finish is the around the elbow finish, and this is something that does work at the recreational level. It does work at the high level, of course, because a lot of players are using this finish. I would say the vast majority of ATP players use this finish around the elbow, and the vast majority of WTA players use a finish that goes a little bit higher above the shoulder. And the reason why this finish is great is because it correlates to a modern heavy topspin forehand. Let me explain that in a little more detail. So when the racket tip goes up in a vertical fashion, this is a modern heavy topspin forehand. See, the tip of the racket goes up and then comes around this way. Naturally, the racket will land somewhere around the middle of the body, which happens to be the left elbow. This is naturally what happens when players play with heavy topspin. On the other hand, on the WTA Tour, the racket does not always travel this way. Yes, it does on some players, but the vast majority of WTA players have more of a flat topspin forehand where the tip of the racket comes through, and now naturally as the racket goes up, it's not going to come down here. It's naturally going to travel towards the non-dominant shoulder. Now here is the important thing that you guys need to understand at the rec level. If you're coming around the ball like this and going around the elbow, you're going to be dumping a lot of balls into the net, and this finish is not going to work for you. You got to remember what I said a couple minutes ago. When the racket goes up in this way, then it's okay to finish around the elbow. So the key factor here is that the racket initially goes up over the ball and then comes down. When that happens on your forehand, it's perfectly okay to finish low around the elbow. But you have to stay away from having a very horizontal, shallow swing path where the racket just goes like this and then goes around the elbow. You're going to be dumping a lot of balls into the net, and you're going to have a hard time getting topspin on your forehand. It feels quite comfortable if the racket indeed goes up. This is kind of a natural way to swing the racket around with heavy topspin. I do like the feel of this finish. Now let me try something interesting. I have a little bit more of a flat topspin forehand, and let me try to hit my regular forehand and finish around the elbow, and let's see what happens. And see, now all of a sudden it feels forced. It doesn't feel natural. So when that tip of the racket comes through the ball this way, it is unnatural to then wrap the racket here. It will result in a more shallow, more horizontal swing path, and you're going to get less topspin on your flat topspin forehand. So again, what you have to understand about this finish that you see on TV is that it only works when there's heavy topspin present. And finally, let's talk about the around the waist finish. A player like Monfils, he has this type of finish, and the same thing that I said for the around the elbow finish can be said for the around the waist finish. Players who wrap their racket around the waist are not doing anything wrong on their forehand. In fact, they have amazing forehands. Why? Because their racket is going up like this, and then instead of going around the elbow, the racket just goes around the waist this way. So again, absolutely nothing wrong with this type of finish. If there's heavy topspin present, if there's a heavy topspin swing path present, where you're going to get in trouble at the rec level if you try to attempt this type of finish and you don't go up with the racket. Now you have very little chance to get that ball over the net consistently, and also when you get it over the net, depth is going to be lacking. Okay, so I'm going to try out the around the waist finish, and the first one I'm going to apply heavy topspin and see what that feels like. That was actually a 10 and under ball. Let me try it again. Heavy topspin and go around the waist. It feels okay, but I prefer actually around the elbow. It feels a little bit awkward for me to bring my arm down. I kind of feel something up here in my shoulder area. It's just not something that I'm used to. And now let me try to hit more of a flat topspin forehand. I'm not going up with the racket, and let's see what that feels like. Yeah guys, the only way this around the waist finish works is if the racket, the tip is going up over the ball. So this is a finish that only works with a heavy topspin forehand. Let me try one more time. So if I go up, now it's okay to go around at the waist. So there you have it. Those are the 5 finishes on the forehand. Now remember what I said in the beginning. Every player at the high level utilizes different finishes depending on the situation they're in. And also every player has their finish that they're most comfortable with, that for example they use when they're just warming up, hitting the ball back and forth, or when they're positioned really well in the court. So when it comes to the recreational level, you definitely need to find a finish that's comfortable for you. You need to find a finish that you're going to be using all the time, where you can develop the muscle memory that you need so you can call this type of finish off in match situations. What I've seen with a lot of my high level players is that they learn these special finishes according to situations that they're in completely intuitively. So naturally they will start getting the racket over the head. They don't necessarily practice this. Naturally they will swing the racket around the waist when they need to. However, I will say that at the recreational level, especially for players who started playing tennis later in life, learning these type of finishes intuitively based on the situation that they're in is less likely to happen. So I also advise you to practice the reverse forehand. I have a video on the reverse forehand, you can check it out. And I also want you to practice going around the waist. Now you're probably thinking, Nick, why? Well, because a lot of players don't practice high balls. And there's going to be certain situations where the racket will travel from high to low on your forehand. For example, if you're close to the net and you get a high ball, you will have to bring that racket down a little bit. So while it is crucial that you find a finish that's comfortable for you, you also want to practice those special finishes. And like I said in this video, what I teach to my students is to find their finish naturally. However, I will say that the best finish is the finish that goes around the shoulder. I'm also okay with the finish that goes around the elbow, with the caveat that does require a proper swing path. This is the reason why I call the around the shoulder finish the best swing path, because it is a versatile finish. You can easily hit the ball more with a flat topspin swing path and finish around here, but you can also apply heavy topspin like Djokovic does and have the racket tip go up and across and then still finish around the shoulder like this. So for that reason, the around the shoulder finish is the best finish on the forehand there is, especially at the recreational level.